Just as an introduction, I'll be moderating for today. Our speaker today is Aaron White. He is the Director of the Office of Regulatory Compliance under the Office of Regulatory and Policy Affairs for the Office of Environmental Management at the headquarters in the Department of Energy. Mr. White has also performed work at Savannah River Site. He's also been the representative to the Low-Level Radioactive Waste Disposal Facility for the Federal Review Group. He also supported the Oak Ridge office with the Department of Energy as an environmental scientist. He has a master's in environmental science from Florida A&M and a bachelor's of science in biology and chemistry from Johnson C. Smith University. Aaron, please take us away.
All right, well, thank you. And give me a second while I try to figure out to share my screen. Let's see if this is working. Okay, can you all just see this section?
Yes.
Okay, you don't see my notes and everything, right?
No, we don't.
Okay. My cheat sheet. So thank you, Josh, for the introduction, and also thank you for inviting me to give this presentation. We have been meeting monthly, Josh and I had given him a similar presentation about a couple of months ago. And he said, oh, this is great information. We should bring it up to everybody and provide it to everybody. So I was like, no, I don't want to do this. But then he convinced me otherwise. So I prepared this little group presentation. Again, my name is Aaron White, and I'm the director for the Office of Regulatory Compliance. Here is an outline of the presentation that I'm going to be giving. There's going to be some discussion of the mission and history of the Office of Environmental Management. I'm not going to get into that much detail because it's probably been presented several times over. So I'm sure everyone on the line is fairly familiar with EM. But then I will get a little bit into my history and my background and how I came to EM, because that really informs the rest of the presentation as how I became a federal employee, my role as a federal employee, and how I worked with contractors. And then I'll give you a little bit of a conclusion, which will include some links that will go out to different hiring agencies for some of the contractors and USA jobs. Key things to note are what's not going to be discussed, and one of the first things that I won't be getting into are some of the contractor teaming arrangements. I use the phrase contractors very broadly, but specifically what I'm referring to are those who are performing the work on behalf of the federal government. And that's primarily through our management and operations contracts, which are the M&O contracts or something similar to that, where we're funding the company or organization to do work on behalf of the federal government. I won't get into some of the specific hiring practices. Before I leave that, regarding the contractor teaming arrangements, like I said, using the phrase contractors very broadly, and I'm not going to be getting into whether somebody works for the prime M&O contract or if the person is a subcontractor to that prime or a sub of the sub, because it can get very complicated very quickly when you talk about one company who is teamed up with another company who has hired another company to perform a task. I won't get into some of the hiring practices because, as you can imagine, it can get very complicated depending on which company is performing what service. And also, I won't be getting into some of our support service contracts, which are those contractors who we have hired to assist us in our federal oversight capabilities. I'll be referring to this phrase oversight several times because that's one of those key areas that we work together, but it also delineates the two groups. And also, this is where I give my caveat saying, again, these are my impressions, some of the things that I've seen in my role as a federal employee. So one of the slides that you've probably seen several times before is this, which talks about the history of how we got to the Office of Environmental Management. And the key thing that I want to point out from this slide is the fact that when we talk about the legacy cleanup that EM is performing, we're talking about a legacy that originated all the way back to the 1940s. We do still have waste that was generated back in the 1940s. We do still have cleanup activities for some of the stuff that happened in the 1940s. One of the silver linings that I always think about, because generally we'll talk a little bit about my background, but I'm an ecologist by training, is the fact that some of the waste that was generated was so bad that the federal government didn't know what to do with, but they knew it was bad enough that they just couldn't put it away. So they put it in containers, they stored it until we had processes like we do today to manage those types of waste. So you can see a little bit about the history, and others have spoken to that before. One of the things that I also want to point out is our mission, and so I'll refer to this several times throughout this presentation, and that's why I'll read this verbatim, which is to complete the safe cleanup of the environmental legacy brought about from decades of nuclear weapons and development of government-sponsored nuclear research. EM's first priority is to ensure the safety and health of the public and EM's workforce while continuing to protect the environment. I read this specifically because when I talk about our roles and how they're intertwined, this is key. We are both responsible for safe, and I emphasize that word, safe environmental cleanup, right? No matter what was the generation of that waste, it's our responsibility combined, whether you're a federal employee performing oversight, whether you're the contractor performing oversight, whether you're the contractor actually managing the waste or operating a particular facility. It's all of our responsibility to ensure that these operations are happening safe, not only to the workers who are performing the work, but to the broader community and again, to the broader environment. So a little bit about me. I like this picture. It was an actual color photo that was in the newspaper way back in the early 2000s, where I got my start doing sea turtle research, where me and this is one of my colleagues were working with the Mote Marine Laboratory in Sarasota, Florida, where we, I like to say detained, we didn't capture or block, but we detained sea turtles, adult female sea turtles, after they were laying their eggs, and attached satellite transmitters to their backs to get a better understanding of their foraging locations. My role was to get a better understanding of their bioaccumulation associated with their foraging locations. In particular, I was looking at heavy metal burdens that were expressed through their offspring, whether it be any unhatched eggs that were still left in their nests, eggshells from the hatchlings that made it out, and any dead hatchlings. It was sad, but dead hatchlings that were still in the nests. My colleague here was doing something similar, where she was looking at the biodiversity of barnacles associated with these sea turtles. We obviously had to clear off the shells to attach this satellite transmitter, and she would collect the different barnacles and kind of make a determination based on the biodiversity of the barnacles to see if there was a relationship to their foraging grounds. So one of the things I like to say is I went from tagging turtles to closing tanks. And the key part to remember associated with this is the fact that my background dealt with the fate and transport of environmental contaminants. So a lot of people say, how did you go from sea turtles to radioactive waste? Well, it wasn't just the sea turtles, it was the fate and transport of environmental contaminants. That's very pertinent to what some of the work that we do, because one of my first jobs was working with the LFROG, the low-level the low-level radioactive waste disposal facility federal review group, also one of my favorite acronyms. Their responsibility is to have a better understanding of the fate and transport of the releases that would come post closure of our disposal facilities. From there, I was also working with the Florida Geological Survey, where I was doing statistical quality assurance for groundwater data for across the entire state of Florida. Two key things to note in my background was, again, the fate and transport of environmental contaminants, but also I was doing statistical quality assurance, in particular quality assurance, which led me to my first job within the Office of Environmental Management. I was hired through a program. It was kind of like a Pathways program that the NNSA has. It was called the Environmental Management Professional Development Corps, where I was hired to do as an environmental protection specialist who was responsible for nuclear quality assurance. So you see that immediately, that little quality assurance nexus. And in that manner, I learned exactly what it took to do government work. It's one of those positions that people love to hate, because as a quality assurance auditor, you are in effect an auditor, and you are responsible for nitpicking every single detail associated with a nuclear facility. And doing that, you learn the reason why it's so expensive to do government work, because there's a reason why we require all these particular documents. Going back to that, one of my key phrases, which is performing oversight. A lot of these nuclear facilities are, or there are very significant impacts if we are not following our procedures properly. There could be very significant impacts if we have a bolt in a nuclear facility that's performing critical nuclear research, and that bolt was made in some country that did not have the pedigree that we require. If that bolt fails, then we are not operating safely. We are not operating compliantly. So we will spend money in order to ensure that we are operating safe and compliant. So that was one of my first jobs, performing oversight through NQA1. Then my next job both of these occurred when I was in Oak Ridge, and my position changed where I became an environmental scientist who was responsible for sanitary, hazardous, and radioactive waste management. A key thing to remember is that waste disposal is the key to environmental cleanup. When we're cleaning something up, we're taking something from an area where it does not belong into a place where we can manage it safely. And I was able to do that with all types of waste. This is one of the areas where I was responsible for life cycle waste management. And by life cycle, I mean from everything from waste generation planning, when we, and I say we being the federal employees, the subject matter experts, as well as the contractors who are performing waste management, who are actually doing the work. We sat down together and say we were doing a gaseous diffusion plant, D&D. We take a look at the facility and say, okay, how much of this facility can be disposed of on site? How much of this facility would have to be disposed of off site? Are there any aspects of this particular facility that will require removal and then subsequent treatment in order to be safely disposed of? So it was one of the times where I worked very closely with our contractor partners, as well as our regulators, because we wanted to make sure that everything we were doing was in line with our regulatory requirements. And from there, I accepted a position as a senior program manager at the Savannah River site, where I was responsible for high-level radioactive waste tank closure and overarching responsibilities for the liquid waste program regarding regulatory compliance. High-level waste was one of the areas that I didn't get very much visibility on when I was in Oak Ridge, but was thrown knee deep into literal or figuratively in knee deep into the high level waste liquid waste program at the Strand River site, where I was very responsible for engaging with the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Conservation, as well as the EPA and the NRC. Again, through all these positions, we worked hand in hand with our contractors. As a federal employee, you have to think about what hat you're wearing, depending on what situation. So when I'm dealing with as the LFRA, I'm a regulator, so I'm working with our contractors and our federal partners as regulators. At other times, we're owners, where we have a contract and we're not owners, we're customers. We have a contract with an organization or company, and they're supposed to be providing us results. So we take a look at that result and make sure that result is what was expected. So I'll go on from here. Oh, and please feel free to stop me at any point in time if you have any questions. So I mentioned before, one of our key roles is with oversight, and I like this figure because it shows you the various roles and again how we work together to perform safe, compliant, and cost-effective environmental cleanup. That's another concept I'll be reiterating throughout this presentation. And to look at to better understand how we perform oversight, it's easiest to look at it from a bottom-up perspective, where you have your activity or your nuclear facility operation that is performing the work. And as federal employees, we have individuals who we call our facility representatives, which are our eyes and ears on site performing the work, on site watching this work happen. The contractors, on the other hand, are the ones who are performing these activities. The contractors are the ones who are hands-on pushing the buttons in these nuclear facilities, performing these operations. That was one of the hardest things for me to grasp when I first became a federal employee, because I wanted to be able to push buttons and I wanted to be able to be the one doing the environmental cleanup, right? I wanted to be the one with my calculator performing the calculations for a particular activity. That's not my role. However, we'll get into a little bit later, I still have to be capable of doing that work, because I want to be able to ensure that the contractor is performing that work safely. And if I don't know how to perform that work, I'm not able to make a determination of what's safe or what's not. So again, we started out this lowest level at the activities or the nuclear facilities. And again, the contractors performing the work, and we have federal eyes directly on them. Very few individuals who are the facility representatives. But to ensure that these operations, again, are occurring safely and compliantly, we rely heavily on our contractor assurance system. What exactly is that? Our contractor assurance system is this system that's in place by the contractors to make sure that they're performing their own oversight activities. This work does not happen in a vacuum, and there's not enough federal employees to provide oversight of every single activity. So a lot of times we rely on the contractors' assurance systems to make sure that they're performing their own self-assessments and reviews to ensure that they're operating safely and compliantly. DOE's responsibility is to not only just observe these activities, but to also be very aware of the contractor assurance system, because if we cannot see every activity, but we know that the contractor has a program and process in place to ensure that they're looking at everything, then all we have to do are spot checks to ensure that the contractor's assurance system is operating as expected. To the next level, this is when you start looking at what I do here at headquarters, where is more DOE program office oversight. And this is as you can see, a third tier third tier level of oversight where, again, it's not my responsibility at headquarters to turn around and go all the way down to do a walkthrough at a particular, to ensure every single activity in the field is operating safely and compliantly. I have to rely on the DOE field element oversights program to ensure that they're performing their oversight of the contractor assurance system and that they have eyes on these particular facilities. So you kind of see the multi-layer defense in depth program that we have. And again, we're all working together because a lot of times if I do, or somebody on my team does want to perform an oversight of a particular activity, we kind of want to make sure that everything is in line. So this particular activity is not stopped just because one person wants to do an assessment, and then another person, it has to stop again because another person wants to do an assessment, and then it has to stop again because another person wants to do an assessment, and then it has to stop again because we have external organizations who come in and perform reviews of our programs. So we try to work together to make sure that if there's one particular activity going on, if there are multiple eyes that need to be laying on it, we can all look at it together to make sure that we're operating safely and compliantly. A perfect example of this is where one time there was an incident at Oak Ridge, and there was literally 5 people doing the work and about 20 people who were on the outside of the fence performing oversight activities. They were representing the DNFSB, the state, multiple state agencies, EPA, couple DOE people. I felt bad because I was supposed to be there, but I was just another body who was on the outside of the fence with the clipboard. Regarding oversight, the Office of Enterprise Assessment is an organization that's within DOE that can perform relatively independent reviews of these programs. The contractors also have external agencies where they could come out that come in and perform reviews. A lot of times these are certification reviews. You may have heard of the VPP, voluntary, I can't think of what VPP stands for, but it's essentially it's a safety oversight certification. There's also ISO, which is International Standards Organization, for 14,001 for environmental management systems, for 9,001 for quality assurance systems. These all require external certification reviews where they look at your entire program and make a determination of quality. So going more specifically into some of our federal employee roles, one of our key roles are to develop policy, to interpret policy and rules and regulations, and ensure proper implementation of that policy. Going back to our mission, we want to ensure the safe and compliant operations. So we have policies that are in place that define how to go about doing that. And one of the key oversight functions that we perform are through audits, assist visits, assessments, and programmatic assessments. I stressed our DOE directive on implementation of oversight. And this is some language that I pulled directly from the order that I want to read directly to you, which is: we are required to maintain sufficient technical capability and knowledge of site and contractor activities to make informed decisions about hazards, risks, and resource allocation, and provide direction to contractors and evaluate contractor performance. Again, going back to my original background, if I did not know how we define radioactive waste, then it would not be appropriate for me to make a determination of risks associated with radioactive waste. If I did not know the principles of project management, it would not be appropriate for me to make a determination of resource allocations, because I have to maintain that technical capability. So even though we're not actually doing the work, we still have to know enough about the work, how the work is supposed to occur, the policies that are driving the work, the contractors, the contracts that are in place that tell the contractor to do the work. We have to maintain knowledge of all of those things in order to be able to make informed decisions. Some key positions associated with this activities are SMEs. These are the subject matter experts. They're, again, compliance individuals who are performing oversight. We also have contracting officers and contracting officer representatives who are either directly directing the contractor or providing interpretations of the requirements that are provided in the contract, as well as our project managers who are ensuring that that the contractor is performing work that's within scope and on schedule and on budget. So a simple way to look at it is this image. You have somebody who's performing work, and then you have the federal employee who just hops in every once in a while and performs oversight of the work. I have to have this other little caveat about this picture because rarely ever would you see the federal employee who's in a higher level of PPE than the person who's performing the work. More likely than not, we would be the person who's closest to the hazard would have the higher level of PPE, but I just found two pictures, so I just threw them together. Going back to maintain that sufficient technical capabilities, in order to ensure that we've got that and are maintaining that, there are programs in place such as our DOE Technical Qualifications Program. It's managed by the Department of Energy's National Training Center. There are over 20 different functional areas, from training to nuclear criticality specialists. And these are all requirements for those who are performing oversight of nuclear facilities. So there is a very rigorous process that we have to go through to ensure that we are maintaining our technical qualifications as subject matter experts. As far as managing the contracts, there's the Federal Acquisition Institute. It's federal government-wide requirements and training, and there are very specific training requirements for the Department of Energy because we have very specific acquisition rules that we have to follow. Also, when you're talking about managing projects, then there's the Project Management Career Development Program, which provides certifications based off of total project cost. You can imagine if you're managing a project that's over $100 million, you have to have some amount of experience of managing projects. Mind you, if you have the lower threshold is $20 million, and you still need to have some amount of experience to be directly responsible to manage a project under $20 million. But our projects very often exceed $100 million. So again, we have federal project directors and certifications for various levels, and we want to make sure that the people are trained and qualified to perform those tasks. And again, there are other requirements for workforce management, as well as security and legal, as well even communications. There are very specific training requirements for our PA staff. So the next area is to jump into some of the contractor roles. Again, their primary role is the safe, compliant, and cost-effective operations. And that includes the implementation of our contract requirements. Again, the contracts that we have in place to perform the work define the lowest level, define what are the things that we need to get accomplished. How we implement the contracts, how we provide oversight of that implementation is collaborative. In that same DOE order 226.1, there's a contractor's requirements document that lays out very specific requirements for the contractors, which includes to ensure that they have a contractor assurance system that includes a method for validating effectiveness. So not just you're performing the work, but you're performing the work effectively, again, cost effective, safe and compliant. making sure you have a rigorous, risk-informed, and credible self-assessment and feedback program. Again, you're making sure that you're providing oversight, and that oversight is rigorous. Key thing that a funny thing that we do as auditors, when you go look at a facility and they have 100 different self-assessments, but no findings in any of those self-assessments. That's not a very rigorous program. Also, if you have you're going to do an audit and you turn around and taking a look at a program and all the issues happened 2 days, or all the issues were resolved 2 days before you showed up, then again, that's not a very credible self-assessment program. You want to be able to ensure that the work is happening, again, safe and compliant. And a structured issue management system. Basically, when issues are identified, the contractors have to be able to resolve those issues. And the contractors need to be free, and a lot of times they are free to bring up these types of issues to their management. There in the field, we have a phrase called stop work authority. Everyone has stop work authority. If you're and what that means is, if you see something that's not safe, whether, again, going back to that teaming arrangement, whether you're a sub of a sub of a sub, you have stop work authority to turn around and say, this is not happening safely. Let's pause and reevaluate the situation. Again, some key positions associated with this are, again, the subject matter experts, and you have similar roles for the contracting officers on the contract side, as well as project managers who are ensuring adequate management of cost, schedule, and scope. So to go back to my little image here, you see, again, somebody performing work, and then you have your contractor assurance system, where you have your individual who's ensuring that the work is occurring safely and compliantly. But then again, you also have the DWE person who's making sure that there's a contractor assurance system in place to ensure that the work is happening safely. This is an example that shows you how you can end up having 15 people, 20 people watching 2 or 3 people doing a task. Speaking of our contractors, a key thing to note is that approximately 95% of our EM budget is spent on our contractors. You want to know where our organization's values lie, follow the money. The money is spent on our contractors. It is very imperative to us to make sure that our contractors are performing this work. Over the next 3 years, we plan to award over 15 new contracts with valuing over $80 billion. Again, these are large numbers, and if you think about the work that we're doing, it's very important. It's very critical work. There are large consequences for not performing the work safely and compliantly. So it's why we spend so much money on our contractors, why we spend so much money to perform the work safely based off of these quality assurance rules. Our contract models emphasizes completion of work at a site. Again, the common theme for our contractors is, and they know this as a fact, it's their job to work themselves out of a job. It's, mind you, a lot of our life cycles go 30, 40, 50 years off into the future. So some of these programs won't be able to work themselves out of a job until their children start working. But then again, some other programs have some other EM programs have cleanup activities that will end in the next decade, the next 5 years. We want to be focusing on cleanup and completion of these cleanup activities. We also want to focus on contracting with small businesses, because we want to ensure the diversity of thought and programs in our cleanup work. And you can see here, there's approximately 26,000 contractor staff who work on behalf of the federal government and doing EM cleanup work. And almost a third of those are covered by unions and CBAs. So if you know people who are technical and in the trades, then you can see that trade work is a very important part of our work. So some inherent comparisons between the two jobs that I wanted to point out for your awareness are when you start thinking about the pay, it's very important for everybody. Well, there's a Davis-Bacon Act that defines pay for our contractors, and DOE as federal employees, we fall under the general schedule pay scale for the most part. Again, there are exceptions to every rule, but these are the primary areas if you're interested in learning more about them. When you start speaking about inherently governmental activities, there are certain things that are inherently governmental. Basically, as a federal employee, we cannot contract this work out. If you think of performance evaluation, we do not want somebody who has a vested interest or may have a vested interest making a determination of performance. On the other side of the contract, for contractors, you have your contractor assurance activities, which are that first level of review of operations. Both groups have subject matter experts, but again, the subject matter experts' responsibility at the federal employee side is different than the subject matter expert employee on the contractor side. We do work together in a lot of times. I was a waste management subject matter expert, and I worked very closely with my contractor colleague, because again, they were the ones who were out there every single day, and that way I only had to do spot checks and could focus on a more policy implementation. Again, same thing associated with project managers. They're both dealing with scope, schedule, and budgets, but for the federal employee, the scope, schedule, budget for that project may or may not be different than the scope, schedule, and budget associated with the contractor who's performing the work. A lot of times we have some management reserve that we want to hold back. A lot of times the contractors have some risk, some associated budget for that's associated budget for risks and realized risks that they want to be able to manage. So there is a lot of there's a lot of collaboration and discussion between the two, and they want to make sure that they're working together again to make sure that the work is happening safely, compliantly, and cost effectively. Again, we the other areas, lawyers in HR and communications, these are common threads amongst both offices there, and we're looking at things differently though. But again, we are working together. So in conclusion, I included these links. I'll make sure that Josh sends this out. I've got to convert this to a PDF and send it, but the link should still work. And the key difference is all of the federal government positions are accessible through USA Jobs. I believe the link goes to one of our very common hiring areas, which is the interdisciplinary general engineers and physical scientists. I believe most of you all fall under those categories. So if you're interested, it's a open pool, open hiring pool for which we can pull individuals for different jobs. But then again, I reached out to some of my contacts and was able to pull some different links for SRMC, that's the Savannah River Mission Completion. That's the prime contractor here at Savannah Riverside. UCOR oh my gosh, I think it's United Cleanup Oak Ridge. This is the prime contractor out at Oak Ridge performing the EM cleanup work, and Central Plateau Cleanup Company, CPCC. This is the prime contractor who's performing some of the work out at Hanford. So those are all my notes. I think I spoke really quickly, but I covered a bunch. I'm open to any questions you may have.
Yes, thank you, Aaron, for that presentation. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to initially bring? Well, I'll field one to you. So how often does someone in the contract side of things get picked up by the DOE as a supervisor or oversight member? Or does the DOE usually like to bring in people and train them themselves in that role?
That's a really good question. And believe it or not, I had a slide in here that was contractors to feds and why, feds to contractors and why, contractors to contractors and why. But that got really complicated as I was thinking about it. But the answer is yes for all the above. A lot of times feds do hire they hire people who are former contractors because they have a unique experiences and capabilities because they have done the work. So when they're performing in the oversight of a particular activity, they have a unique perspective because they know what it's like to do the work. Also, they know the tricks of the trade, so they can also be able to work with the contractor and say, okay, well, I know why you normally would do this because I would have done this when I was in, or I did this when I was in your shoes. And vice versa. We also like to hire, again, people who are newly coming out of school, because we want to be able to bring them up and lay them on the ground so that they can turn around and work with the contractors and learn what they're doing. I was hired directly out of graduate school, and one of my first tasks was to, my highlight of the day was to sit in a meeting with them some contractors where they would talk about some waste disposition activities. And then my next highlight of the day was to go out and watch people put stuff in boxes. 10 years later, it was very boring and a waste of my skills because I know what it looks like to put stuff in a box. But then again, I knew the reason why I had to go through that because later on I was able to have a better appreciation of our waste inventories when we're managing our waste inventories across the complex. I know to the various detail as to how they develop those specific numbers. So that's from contractors to feds. A lot of times feds go to contractors as well. A lot of times it's more in the latter end of their careers where they could turn around and, well, to be abundant, to be blatant, a lot of times people do it for retirement. You can retire as a federal employee early and then work to get a second retirement. But the benefit of being able to do that for the contractors is now the individual can be an advocate for that work because they have those connections. They know what it's like to work at headquarters or work in the as a federal employee. So it's easier for me as the federal employee to work with somebody who was a former federal employee because that person can speak my language and know exactly some of the things that I need to move that operation on. And then going to the contractor to contractor, again, we have these teaming arrangements where you may have a subcontractor who was working as a RadCon person, who may go to another contractor where they're performing that contractor assurance activity of oversight, where you were working for a sub and now you're working for the prime to perform that oversight. Again, it's that transfer of knowledge and building upon the knowledge and being able to share it which leads to you to moving from one area to the other. Sorry, my nose is itching. It's allergy season.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions? Comments?
Yeah, I just have a simple question. Thank you, Mr. White, for your talk and presentation today. So I know you were mentioning in one of your previous slides that usually the contracts are multi-year, and like they're also multi-billion, like the amount associated with those contracts are very high. So I was just wondering, like, what sort of, so once a contractor gets a job essentially working with all of you, what sort of checks do you or evaluation are usually there in place to make sure that, you know, like the timelines that are being set for a project are being followed? Does it, like, I'm just wondering what the process actually looks like.
Okay, so I'll answer that two different ways. The first way is regarding oversight. The second way is speaking of the actual position, because one of the things that you refer to is these contracts have timelines, and a lot of times at the end of the contract, there is a period of uncertainty where people turn around as a contractor say, okay, well, the company that I'm working for no longer exists, but the job's still here, right? I believe at one of the earlier phrases was a bulk employee. A bulk employee was somebody who was below senior management, and a lot of times in these contract transitions, there is a requirement to maintain the bulk of your employee. So there is that job stability to say that, okay, if I'm working for a contractor and there is a contract transition, very likely you're still safe in your job. The other part of it, speaking about the timelines, that's where it depends on the project, because one of the things that we're now moving into are what's known as these end-state contracts, where we issue specific task orders that have very specific timelines that are tied to very specific end results. And there's a process called earned value management where you can actually track scope completion per dollar spent, as well as per day or per schedule. So it's a very important role that both we as the federal oversight individuals, as well as our contractor partners do have to manage very closely, because we want to be able to make a course correction before, like you said, these are multi-year, multi-billion-dollar contracts. If something goes off, we don't want to wait till we're $5 billion down the road of a 5-year contract to say, hey, something's off. We want to be able to track how much value we are getting per dollar per day, and to be able to say, okay, something is off. Let's reevaluate what's going on and be able to make course corrections.
Okay, thank you.
We have just a little bit of time left. Does anyone have any final questions or comments? All right, I think we were well covered. Thank you for that great talk.
All right, thank you all for listening.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
All right, and I wish everyone a very happy Friday. We will have one more talk this year, and I hope to see you all there.
Happy
Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Take care. See y'all.
See you later.